Welcome everybody to this episode of the Melissa Killeleagh Show. I am your host. And if you don't know me or you haven't watched this show before, there's been an evolution over the last couple of years since I started this, working with Finger Lakes One. In the beginning, there was this idea that there was just too much doom and gloom going on in the news for the amount of legacy and leadership and impact going on in our community in the greater Finger Lakes region. So I just wanted to bring to the table people who were doing incredible work out in the world. And so it started there and evolved into a place of really focusing on people living their lives with passion and purpose. And more recently, the shift has been into this idea of working with other professionals who are not only into values-driven living, but values-driven businesses. And with everything that's been going on in the world over the last 3, 4, 5 months, sometimes it feels like a year. I tell everybody that it's my 5-year plan to get through 2020. I couldn't think of a better person to talk to than my dear, beautiful friend and colleague, Michelle Courtney Berry, who's with us today, who has been a business owner herself for many years with Courtney Consulting Enterprises, is recently working on projects related to mindset equity, and has had a lot of messages over the years that have always been so relevant to everything going on in the world, including how we take care of ourselves as people, as professionals in our industries. And so I'm so grateful to have you here today, Michelle, because over the years, I'd say like the last decade that we've known each other, it's always been so great to be able to touch base with you. It feels kind of like a coming home for a moment, right? Like touching base with someone who just gets it and immediately connection, be able to reflect on whatever's going on in life and society, and to have meaningful conversation. There's no stopping at what's going on with the weather or scratching the surface with us. And I've always appreciated that between you and I. So thank you for being here. And I would love for you to kind of give a snapshot of you and, what you are working on right now and where you see it going.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Melissa, I love you. Thanks for having me. I feel the same way about you. It is a coming home. So in terms of a snapshot of what's going on right now, I think a lot of self-work so that I can walk the talk. And, so I'm not giving presentations anymore on the importance of sleep and having been sleep deprived the night before, or, yes. And if I'm up with anxiety, I don't hide it. I talk about how all of us, have our own story, our own struggles. And so it's not about perfection. It's about building a practice that you can come home to and rely on, that really feeds you, because you have to be filled up so that you can serve more. So the projects I'm working on right now are just continuing to connect with clients around the region and the world who are visionaries, who want to have a greater impact, but feel like they continuously need to press reset. They're redefining their business. They're redefining their missions. And so what motivates me is to drill down into my own big why, serving bigger and better in ways that take in this deep appreciation for not knowing. And I definitely know that I'm a control freak in recovery, right? So this not knowing what's going to happen. And it's to think to be a good coach, I had to try to reach a level of nirvana or perfection. And I actually, when I started working with famous coaches and going to their workshops and retreats, they were like, no, actually show clients the vulnerability, the fact that there isn't a perfection, that it's a dance and it's an improvisation at best. And, it's the journey, not the destination. And so what ways could I be on a journey that was, more insightful about what my failings were, what my biggest stumbling blocks were. So when I started revealing those, I attracted more people because it was just more real, like when you're snapping at the family and, carrying on, and then you like get on your podcast and you're like, after you've just been like screeching through the house and like, that, and it's like, I've had my daughter say, who are you? And it's like, well, both people, but the clients are nicer to me sometimes than the family, so, and being in this isolation or this imposed isolation or everyone under one roof, for some people that's really working well. And for other people, it's really tough. And so just trying to meet people where they're at and recognizing that we have these many global pandemics in common, and what's going on with weather, what's going on with race relations, what's going on with COVID, and how they all intersect. And so just bringing a questioning mind to these experiences and being open to sometimes it doesn't all fit together and work out, and that's okay too. So the messiness, the uncertainty, and the ways that we can try to build equity and justice and social justice through these lenses just have made me just a better listener to myself and to others. So right now I'm working on deep listening, and I'm thinking, what are those 2 to 3 year projects you've been putting off and resisting around the home, in your business? Well, now's the time. You want to learn a language? You learn a language. You want to listen to some audiobooks? Listen. But it's this listening or redefining what self-care looks like, and redefining what integrity and authenticity look like are really the places I've been landing. And so that's the snapshot, is the how to not do a lot of navel gazing, right? Hold your own information, but realize there's an expansive world out there and a different way of getting at something. So when you talk to enough people, you have the power of knowing there's a lot of solutions to a common problem.
Wow. Right? I listened to you, and I'm so grateful, because the thing that I have watched in your journey over the last decade is that it isn't about that perfection. It's about being, it's about leading from the front with what the message is, right? And so when you talk about these things, when you talk about with integrity and authenticity and being able to sit back and really just hear what's going on and how to bring it all together in this cohesive way, I feel like that's what many of us need in the world of small business, in the world, in the world, period, right? Whether we're talking about, you're somebody who's on the school board, or you're somebody who is running a corporation, or you are a parent, right? That's a message that I think we can all appreciate and learn from. And it's interesting to me when you talk about how you feel like that's what you're really doing right now, is listening. Because, and I like to name the things, right? Like when this pandemic hit,
right,
that was the beginning of knowing, like, okay, not only if you've got some projects, it's a good time to start working on them, but also, like, if there's stuff you have not attended to in yourself, it is going to surface.
Amen. 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 Yeah. Or as Lisa says, yes, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, so that's been, so the listening, the internal listening, right? Mm-hmm. And then when we began to really open up to the world, like, I believe that George Floyd became a message to the world about our country and the state that we are truly in, asking for support. And it was so powerful to see the world stepping up, saying, like, enough. And so for me at that point, it became about listening to everyone else, like hearing what is truly happening, and trying to find myself within all of this, because I had mentors out there saying things like, if you're silent right now, then you're part of the problem. And I just kept thinking, like, there is a time for listening and learning, and, bringing voices to the forefront who have been working with racial injustice and all of the different things going on for decades.
Yeah.
My voice is not the voice that needs to be heard right now. And I felt this deep pain around it, but it just kept being this evolution of keep listening, keep listening, keep listening. And honestly, Michelle, this is the first podcast I've been able to record since then, because I haven't felt called to come to the table for a conversation yet. I know that time is coming, because I know that I'm here to be part of the work that needs to be done in the world. But I also know that I've got a lot of unlearning to do. I've got a lot of learning to do. I've got so much listening to do. And so, you know, I'm really excited for this work that you're doing now when you talk about mindset equity. I would love to talk about that and continue to kind of explore for a second the relationship between that and this idea of, you know, values-driven living and values-driven businesses. Like, how do you feel it coming deeper and deeper in alignment with not only your own personal life and being in integrity, walking that with that authenticity, being able to show up imperfectly, but also as it relates to the world?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. When you look at our mindsets, I think we know enough about the research that a fixed mindset would be very difficult right now, because it doesn't offer the expansion. It's narrow. It keeps you boxed in. And a growth mindset increases that possibility for understanding. So in centering ourselves in that kind of work or that language, what I've been working with individuals and organizations and companies with are trying to really more a path of pacing oneself, becoming mindful where you're at in this conversation, where you're at with your own biases, where you're at with the disturbances that have been going on. This is the what we're seeing in the country, particularly with questioning about even our police forces. And you have to know where they began. You have to understand what policing looked like in the beginning, and you can't divorce it from its current iteration, although for some people that seems preposterous, right? But it's certainly to know the history and know that it's a systemic thing rather than an individual thing, right? It's really looking at policies and programs. So if we have a growth mindset, we have to rethink our policies and our programs, and we have to see the intersectionality between policing and community systems, and we have to make sure that we provide those pieces of support for a lot of our officers who really want to ask these bigger questions, and for some who don't feel safe asking those questions. And so we're all in this together, and until we make it safe for everybody, none of us are safe. So the safety is just an illusion. And so I think about how interesting it is just when you talk about race. And there's some people who are like, well, we know that race is a construct and it's a mirage, and we know that we're all related, and we know that race is just a made up thing. But we have to recognize that where we hold that as true, we have to hold the other thing that we've made it real because we've constructed races. And some of the people who began these original constructions of race weren't even including women in this conversation. They were mostly just talking about white men, right? And then what does it feel to be a white man doing work at this time, or a white man stuck? Like, what does that look like? And so because I work with a lot of people, and a lot of people of color, and a lot of white men and women, for some white people, just talking about themselves as white is a new thing, right? To consider their race, and so what challenges do we come up with the good idea of we should be colorblind? Started as, I think, an impulse of let's just all be one, let's be one human body. And until we deal with these isms, until we deal with racism and poverty and homophobia and sexism, and classism and gender bias, it's very hard to get to this one human place. So we can get to the one human place by recognizing those constructs designed to divide, and those constructs in which people don't see one another. It's very difficult through conflict and feeling put upon or targeted to be able to have expansive conversations in mindfulness, right? So it's going to take more than just this one cycle. We're in places that feel revolutionary. So that change is going to create a lot of tumult for people and a lot of deep questioning, and for other people, a lot of fixed mindsets. Like, who do these people think they are is a fixed mindset, or everything's fine is a fixed mindset. And so I try to work with the mindset, like, where does that come from? Or ask ourselves a deeper question. Like, you'll find so many people have been cheated by not understanding the full history of the country, or the full history of these of even policing. And so if you know that policing started out as slave patrols, or to catch enslaved people, if you know that policing partnered with keeping Jim Crow laws in place, right? Knowing that, or interrupting the work of freedom riders. And so there's not all negatives, but those initial places of beginning have negative impact, right? And certainly pit Black and brown people, and police into conflict continuously, and not even understanding those original roles. But yet, when I've worked with police officers, many of whom are white, they often do not connect bias with their arrest record, or unconscious bias. They really sincerely do not. Or many of them have so much trauma themselves that they're in trauma. So many police officers obviously will feel targeted or singled out, and I'll try to make that comparison, like how people of color feel targeted and singled out, or people make judgments about us before they even meet us, right? And not all positive. And so what is that like? And I try to say, well, there's an intersectionality between that, between how you feel people judge you by how you look. There's a way people judge me, and try to have that conversation. And I've gotten really deep with many officers in very uncommon places, in rural places, in cities, and then bridging those communications between communities and what we want policing to look like of the future. So I think it's going to break this whole thing wide open, and there is going to be fallout. There's going to be because in our country right now, there is that tension between fixed and growth mindset.
Right.
And it's not, and you can't take a cavalier attitude where I can just give myself Reiki and send it to the world and sit in eternal Om and it's going to be fine. Like, in a lot of ways, it's an action. The love that I feel for humanity is an action, and it's also calling many things out, but calling them in. That we have work to do, we have learning to do about one another, and keeping that expansiveness in ourselves. Like, it can be really difficult. I remember, that I love Maya Angelou, and I feel it's my ancestor that I just really got so much still from, and I got a chance to meet her and open for her, as you know. And I remember her telling a story that when O.J. Simpson was first released, you notice on the news sometimes divides us, right? I saw a lot of white women in great distress. I was living in Binghamton at the time, and they were working in domestic violence and advocacy for women and women in shelters. And they were sobbing. And I was at the table thinking, this is a terrible thing. What does this do around the rights of women and their safety, right? Because I certainly felt that he was guilty. And I saw a bunch of white men cheering. I was in a sports bar. Yet when I turned on the evening news, it was Black people celebrating in the streets and white people crying. And I thought, what an interesting dichotomy, because I saw a lot of white men celebrating his release because he was a great athlete, right? And it was a sports bar, and it was filled with mostly white people. So I saw white people have very differing reactions by gender. But when I turned on the news, it was just Black versus white. And there were some Black people who felt he was guilty, like I did, who were feeling like, because our criminal justice system has not been just, this was a sign. He was a Black man of affluence and international stature, but that but there was tampering with the police evidence, right? Like, I think if there wasn't tampering, you probably would have been convicted the first time. And so looking at the tampering, looking at the ethical problems, but also looking at that he had the means to be exonerated in a criminal justice system that had skewed in ways that against Black and brown bodies. I definitely think that there were some people celebrating that happened, but not necessarily exonerating him for what they felt was clearly, murder and domestic violence. And so, but I saw many different reactions among different people and groups, depending on what region you were in, what kind of culture you were in. It wasn't as clean as the evening news. So Maya was telling a story about how her, the godmother of her sons, is a white woman, and when OJ was released, the woman thought in her head a very ugly epithet about, or a racial slur about him, and realized she had Black godsons, and she called Maya and said, "Oh my God, I failed you. I had this reaction. Please help me." And Maya's response was, "Help me to help you." Not because that's a conditioning in our culture. That's a word that's been commonly said and in families and with people. And Maya didn't say, "Now we're done because you thought that or said it, and I have Black children and you're their godmother." She just said, "Help me to help you." And I thought, if she could do that in that situation, what more could I do? What more could how more, and particularly since I'm the daughter of a biracial mother and I have a biracial child myself, what ways could I stop othering whiteness? What ways, when I had a negative experience, could I not be like, why won't white people get it about race? Why won't white people do better? And instead think about, this is a system that we're born into, and how do we change that system? And how do we speak with one another through the hard times? Because our training and our work, it has to mean, how do we behave in the worst circumstances? How do we behave in the test to pick sides, right? How do we behave in that, right? Is about our character. If everything is smooth and all our friends agree with us and we're never in conflict, we have no chance to test compassion. We have no chance to test our openness. We have no chance to test our hearts. So loving people who have harmed, loving people who don't believe. The two of us, our histories just together as women are exclusion. We weren't voting, right? So you're taking the work that you and I have been able to just do through a psychic level over the years, and how I admire you. And the love we bring to each other. That's the conversation, right? Because there is a way that people get divided, and particularly women of color and white women, and there's a history to that. And if we look in legacy and we go back in time, right, you're really talking about white women burned at the stake, right? You're talking about for women of color enslaved. You're talking, or colonized, and so when we fight amongst ourselves, we have shared oppressions, we have shared experiences, or the ways that we show up in the world, and a gendered world, and how those choices get made, or how the pressure on women who are mothers, there's the pressure on women in general. And I think this kind of expectation that we will always just be doing well no matter what, and we will show to the world some sort of perfection that can't happen. The pressure we put on ourselves is extraordinary. So I think when we meet in the middle and talking about what pressures are on us and what things are we doing that feel performative as opposed to just real, I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm just going to go into my preacher mode.
No, I think I run out of time. It's absolutely incredible, Michelle, because there's this beautiful and rich theme that pulls through all of what you just shared, which for me is about, it's somewhere in the place of building bridges, right? It's building bridges between actions and beliefs and behaviors. It's building bridges between our understanding of self and society and how media influences and portrays us. It's building bridges between communities, building bridges between Black and white women, building bridges between the police and people of color, All of this brings me back to this deep realization that I had a few weeks ago when I realized that I have a lot of friends out there who are, in the street, front line, whether it's in Portland or wherever else in our country. And while I participated in various demonstrations up here shortly after the death of George Floyd, I also realized that I was not prepared to be the person coming out with my fist up. But I am fully prepared to be the person who can show up to the table and have real conversations that are not easy, and that ask us to come with compassion and to test exactly what you talked about. And it is somewhere in that place of building bridges. And so I'm so grateful to hear that, because I feel like, it's just another one of those reminders that we all have the need to find our own voice here and our own place where we're utilizing our gifts, our strengths, our talents in a more meaningful way, right? It actually reminds me of, I think I told you right before we got on here, that quote that hit me, that brought my work together in the world. I work for a company where I really make self-care my business. Whether we're talking about, skincare, nutrition, whatever it is, like self-care is my business. And the quote was around, self-care without social justice, self-care work without social justice work is really privilege patting itself on the back. And that sunk in so deeply for me, because as I watched my company move into this place of, becoming a certified B Corporation and really working on mental health with our young people and our connection to nature, there's this reality for me that the shift begins, right? The shift begins, like getting to this place where, I've always thought about myself in relation to the things that matter to me in the world, but now it's really about like rubber meets the road, right? It makes me think of one of my greatest mentors over the last decade was and has been Gwen Weber-McLeod, and she would constantly say, like, this is the time where you realize, like, it's not just about, the everyday work, it's about what's the legacy and where's your leadership in all of it.
Yeah.
And so you have modeled that consistently for me, being able to watch from the sidelines, being able to connect and engage in conversations when, the fabric of our tapestry would, intersect, has been so meaningful. And I'm grateful through conversations recently to know that, as we move forward, we will become more intentional about that. Because I support, believe, and deeply admire all the work that you do and every pivot that you make, right? So I want to talk about that for a second, because I know, like, one of the pivots has been the shift from, like, let's think about equality to let's really think about equity. I don't necessarily think everybody makes the distinction there. But also just the ability to pivot on a personal level as a human, as a business owner, as a woman of color, going through these times that we're in, having a lot of the things that you love essentially being, like, taken away. Michelle, you're not getting on a plane to go do your work anymore. Like, Michelle, you can't have this right now.
Right.
What does all this feel like as you move through this space?
Right. Thank you so much. And I love Gwen. I'm lucky to be in the same sorority as she is. And she's amazing. And she's been such a guidepost for me throughout my years meeting her and living up here. I guess what it means is that you have to know how you feel at first. And sometimes it just feels really lousy. So I believe where people get shut down is they get told that they can't have their own feelings because they have to think about all the suffering. And what I try to hope what I hope to inspire is you can hold it all. I can be disappointed that I'm not on planes, and I can recognize that more people who look like me are dying than ever right now from COVID, right? And I can hold that, and I can hold regrets or sadness that I don't get to do some of the comfort things, but then I can create them in my home, right? So it's more important to me that I pay it forward, that I'm working with people who couldn't normally afford coaching, and I hold that spot in my calendar for them. That giving back lets me then feel like, okay, but I can worry about my eyebrows too. Like, it's not either or. Like, I'm like, somebody's got to get to these eyebrows, And so people will be like, you can't think about your eyebrows when people are dying. It's like, yes, you can think about both, actually. If I don't recognize that some of the self-care rituals that I indulged in were extremely privileged, and every time that I took them, I recognized the privilege of going to spas. I took somebody who'd never been to a spa before in her life, who grew up in poverty, and I was like, so did I grew up at the poverty line, and I think I just kept trying to escape from some of those places or memories when things were hand-me-downs, or I had a used motorcycle and everyone had a new one. And it's like, hey, but you had a motorcycle, you were 10. Like, I try to look at both what scraping and budgeting look like, and how it led to overspending later, and how I had to tuck that in and get back to budgeting. And I had to look at money, right? And not be afraid of money, and to ask for my rate so I could help more people, and not to hobby my business, right? And then cripple it in many ways. So I think just being upfront right now about what you personally feel and what you feel you've lost, and then still having the capacity to recognize how you can still give, or what you can donate, or how you can show up. So I guess how it's all resonating for me is just continuously checking in on what are the values, what things drive you, and what ways do you want to continue to help and serve. To me, if my job is to help visionaries press reset so they can continue to live their big why, so they can de-stress and not burn out. If I shut them down and told them what was important to worry about or not, that's so judgmental. But I think sometimes we have mantra language that's just so isolating. There are times when I'm like, what are you bringing to this experience? Like, what are your, your end goals? And then after a while, I learned to be like, what just sucks today? That's just like an easier way to get, like, what isn't feeling right? And allowing people to have their individual experience, like, and not feel guilty. There's no point lecturing people right now. I don't think that's going to work. People won't grow in shame, blame, or lecturing, but they'll grow in meeting them. You just have to meet them where they're at.
Yeah.
And recognize that some of the people that you avoid and don't want to listen to as well remind you of yourself or a place you used to be in. So just because you've evolved, right, and gotten to this different place, don't act like you weren't in this other place. Put yourself back in that place and don't be afraid of it. Sit in it, because we've all been in that place where, with so many issues, where, you made up a bunch of stories about other people and live those stories as if they were real. And so if you interact with somebody who's making up a bunch of stories about other people, I think resist judging them, because you used to do it and still capable of it. Because that's how the mind wants us to be. It runs a bunch of stories and it wants to take over and make you. And it's often quite divorced from reality, but it's in your head.
Yes.
So how do we drill into our hearts right now? And drill seems very exaggerated. How do we focus on what the heart's telling us when the thoughts and the fears, and not there's anything wrong with having fears, but just recognizing that you have them and still moving forward and still helping and still healing. And so if you don't heal yourself, I don't know how you heal the world, right? So you just do it one person at a time, one program at a time, one idea at a time, one advancement at a time. And then with us working together, because we're here to love. Because we're here to love. And I believe love will always win. Always. Not always when you want to see it happen.
Right.
Always
We don't get to control that part.
No.
Right. So, and I love that. And I know that we need to stop, but I think we also need to commit to having a second part to this conversation, if not more.
Oh, I would love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Enthusiastically so. Yes.
Yes. Because, there's so much there when we talk about, really tapping in and tuning into the heart. There's so much there when it comes to the what's next, right? The how do I take the things we're talking about and how do I actually put them into action? Because it's like a whole different thing for a lot of people. And this is where I feel like we often fail ourselves as a society, because we do the great work to like start getting in touch with our feelings. Sometimes we do the great work to dialogue it out, whether it's with friends or counselors, but we don't often take it to that next place of like, okay, now that we've done that, how does that change how I show up in the world? How does that inform what I bring to the table? So I want to thank you, Michelle, so much. Well, we will schedule that next episode.
I can't wait.
And I will make sure that I include all of your contact information so people can get in touch with you. But anybody who's listening right now, if you are one of those people who really needs to, take care of yourself so that you can do your great work in the world, so that you can really live your why, Michelle has some exceptional capability to just get you into her schedule. And so we can send that as well. So you can be talking to her about the things that you need and how she can help you. And I look forward to watching the mindset equity work continue to unfold as well. So yes, part 2. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Melissa. I love you. Thank you.
I love you too.
Bye, dear. Take care.